Hi there, and welcome back to the playlist, or welcome to the playlist if you're just joining. In this section of the psychometric test playlist, we're going to be looking at games-based assessments. These are relatively new forms of psychometric test. They are usually, almost exclusively in fact, online, and they essentially have you playing some kind of game and make an assessment based on how you interact with it. These assessments are usually quite rapid and short response games, and the idea is to assess your personality, decision making, maybe even cognitive ability in an objective way. That's really key. You'll see a lot of personality tests that are quite difficult to assess in the sense that they are self-reported, so they are potentially open to subjective measurement. They can be quite difficult to measure and quite difficult to make sure that you're having a honest response to a question. Something that's games-based, by contrast, can collect thousands of data points to actually assess real behaviour rather than something that's self-reported, so it's a lot more objective and easy to measure. The challenge for you might be that different organisations use the same assessment but in a completely different way. The fit will be different. There's no one approach, so you do need to be ready for different styles of game in that regard. This example here comes from Graduates First, and it's the balloon burst game, which is a fairly simple concept. I think Mario Party has one of them, where you essentially decide how far you want to go to inflate a balloon before it bursts versus collection and collecting that balloon. On the top left, you can see total earned, current earned. The more you inflate the balloon, the more you earn, but then the closer potentially you come to that balloon bursting. Take a minute, pause the video if you'd like, think about what they're trying to measure here. That's key when coming into a games-based assessment. What are they trying to assess? And like I said at the top, there are thousands of data points that they could be gathering, but in this particular example, they're going to be assessing three key things: your emotionality and the way you take risks. Think about that inflation versus collection and how ready you are to risk the balloon bursting. They're going to be taking your decision-making process and how you manage that into account, and potentially even your sociability. This is why that preparation comes in that we mentioned in the previous video. You've got to think about what they're trying to test, what the organisational culture is going to be like, and before you actually participate in the game, think about what they're trying to measure, because that could potentially inform the way you play the game, the way you take that test. Having done that research and thinking, then you can get a sense of what they are trying to measure. Now, you can't have all of these in mind. There are over 70 behavioural measures that they might be testing for, but you can, having done that research, think about the key ones, the ones that they are going to be looking at in some detail there, and then use that to inform how you play the game, whether it's risk-taking or trust, or how you plan, how you process information, fairness, all these kinds of things. Before you play the game, just take that moment to think, what are they trying to test? What are they trying to measure? You might also come up against a personality questionnaire or a personality test, something like what we call MBTI, which is the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Now, the games-based assessments are a way to do this personality questionnaire in a more sort of blind, more measurable way. You might come up against a written personality questionnaire. These are slightly different. They're testing the same things. They're not usually timed, and all it will be is maybe a 1 to 5 scale of how would you rate yourself against this particular criteria on that scale. They, generally speaking, contain internal checks for inconsistent answers, so they're trying to get a sense of who you are quite consistently, and those results, whatever they might be, form a profile of the candidate, which is, or should be at least, shared with you as the actual candidate. There aren't many ways you can prepare for these. It is trying to get a general reflection and a genuine reflection of who you are, how you might behave. So I would suggest not preparing for these too heavily, and don't really try and think about your answers too much, apart from referring to the research you've done. and try not to game the system, because that can quite easily be caught by the system, which will be presented as a red flag when inconsistent answers are evident. So don't worry too much about those. These tend to be less common, and we're seeing more of the games-based assessments for this type of test. That brings this section to a close. If you could, as usual, like, subscribe so that we can grow the channel, get through to more students and graduates, we'd really appreciate it. Coming up in the last section of the playlist, we'll be looking at verbal and numerical reasoning tests and introducing how you can practice with the University of Manchester through something called Graduates First. See you there.